Now, I can see a couple of them have already dialed in, so I'm going to go ahead and start introducing my panelists for the next session whilst they dial in. So in no particular order, I'm going to be joined by Vincent Bonney, who's the Head of Business Analysis from Swiss Re, Graham McDermott, who's the CDO from Addison Lee, Payal Jain, who is the Managing Director of J-Curve and the Chair of Women in Data, and finally Freddie Desibia, who is the Executive Director of Big Data from Goldman Sachs. Now, I think I can see Payal, I can see Vincent, and I think I can see Graham. I think we're just waiting on Freddie to dial in. Hello, guys. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having us.
Very good.
Hello, everybody.
Awesome. We'll just let Freddie dial in, but whilst he's going away and doing that, let's jump into our first poll, because we want our audience to help us with the first part of this question. So you should be able to see that on your screen now. So we're asking you, where would you say you are on your journey to streamlining your processes across your enterprise? So that is what today is going to be all about, and how these guys have been doing that and where they are on their own journey. So would you say you have completed it? Are you almost complete, still in that process in the planning stages, or you haven't even began to streamline the process and you are working in silos? So I'll give you a couple moments, and hopefully we'll be joined by Freddie real soon. And panelists, do get thinking about this question too, because I might come and ask you the same thing. Okay, and let's have a look at these answers here. So panelists, if you're able to see these as well. So we have the majority saying they are still in the process, and then it's a fairly even split between haven't begun planning stages and almost complete. That's a really interesting result. Thanks, everyone, for doing that. Now, across this entire session, please do submit your questions, because I'm going to take them and feed them into this discussion. So if you have any questions for them, do get them into us now. So, panelists, I'll put the same question to you. Where would you say you are on your streamlining journey? Are your processes slick and smooth? Graham, do you want to jump in first on that one?
I think when I first saw the question, I was about to say almost complete. And then actually sometimes it unearths that you're not quite complete. So we're definitely in progress on our journey. And I sort of think back to like 4 years ago, I inherited a data team that had virtually no processes. And it quite surprised me, because data teams are quite logical people. But I think they just were badly led. I think they had a weak strategy. And I don't think they'd ever worked out the long-term value of automating things. And so I think we've rebuilt things, we've documented stuff, we've automated over time. And sometimes it's not the right time to automate something or to make it slicker. And we do a bit of a sort of, I call it my fag packet calculation. So I sort of just look at over a 1 year or 2 year horizon, how much time are we automating it? How many events, how many times do we actually do it manually? And you compare that in days or hours versus how long is it going to take you to automate it. And sometimes the difference between those two values can be quite big, and you think, I really must do it. Sometimes it's quite small. That doesn't mean never do it, but you may come back to it when perhaps you've got less pressing work. So interesting thing is, as we went into furlough for a lot of people recently, we thought, yeah, we're almost complete on automation, but actually going through that had unearthed some things that actually were not automated. And so just having those disturbances caused us to unearth in our own team, where we thought we were kings of the jungle in automation, actually we were not perfect after all.
Brilliant. I think that's so interesting, kind of the idea of, you know, sometimes it's not the right time. And I think a lot of these things, people want to go at them straight away because they want to get going. But that's really, really interesting. Vincent, do you want to add in on that? Where are you in your journey?
Well, in our journey at Swiss Re, or maybe generally for a large insurance and reinsurance company, everything revolves around data. So actually, it's trying to find the best, the smooth interaction between human processes and data. It's a continuous endeavor to try to improve things, of course. I would say that probably all the blue sky cases have been automated many, many years ago, so nothing new on that side. There are probably still low-hanging fruits here and there to improve and to automate, for example. There are definitely some pockets of resistance in the company, but for very good reason. You cannot, for example, automate everything. Some processes require very specialized knowledge. It requires understanding the data in its context and interpreting some data. So here, I would not say that it has to be automated. But I think for the focus of the industry now, it's probably less about automated things within the company that actually automated things, improving the processes between the companies. For those of you who know the insurance or reinsurance value chain, we have a lot of intermediaries. You have brokers, insurance companies, reinsurance, retrocessionaires. And actually, the whole mechanism of risk transfer and spreading, there are a lot of redundancies and a lot of manual handling in those processes, distorting the data along the way. So here, I think it is the big focus of most of the companies for already now and for the years to come, where actually things could be massively improved.
Brilliant. It's so interesting that you say about the smooth interaction with people and that resistance. I think that's definitely something we can cover in a moment's time in a bit more detail. Payal, would you like to add in as well?
So I guess as Jacob, we're a consultancy that are privileged to work for a few CDOs in the industry in large organizations. And I guess, when I think about processes, let's just focus on the analytics team as an entity in themselves. But we've definitely, your survey here and the outcomes are definitely what we're seeing in that, teams are very siloed in some ways. And even how they work, if bringing work into the team, how they prioritize, how they execute and manage that and how they learn from it is kind of fairly broken in itself. In the simplest way, forget about the data infrastructures underneath and that flow. And so, there's a huge opportunity, I think, of kind of smoothing that out and getting that flow to work better. And then, that's just within the data team. But then if you start thinking about it at an organizational level, that's where the real opportunity is going forwards and, really needs to be focused on. And that kind of view of being focused on business outcomes and thinking about working in value streams. So, for instance, retention of banking products, for example, having that flow of people working together aligned to that outcome. What we've seen clients is that there's a 20 or 30% uplift in that speed to value perspective. So, I think the survey results here really kind of confirm what we're finding in organizations, in that there's big opportunity and lots of low-hanging fruit.
Brilliant. I think let's move on and kind of develop that further, because I think it's so interesting, what you said there with the silos and, people prioritizing their data, time and learning. And I think from what Graham and Vincent said, also that kind of communication as well, and everyone being on the same page of the plan and of the journey. So what I'd love to know from you guys is how have you been dealing with those silos? Because I assume that they're present for all of you, as they do seem to be. And it is a topic that has risen across this event for lots of different aspects, from data management through to automation. So it'd be great to hear about this from you guys. So, Payal, as you last spoke, do you want to jump straight back in and kind of give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm massively a strong believer in breaking down silos. And actually, if you think about it, the ideal going forwards is that the data team are a community where they come together, share learnings, but actually they should be distributed across an organization, really, but focused on business outcomes. And, just to kind of give you a couple of examples on this, but that focus on business outcomes, we've seen some of our clients, create game-changing speed to market and some of the things that they're trying to do. Like one of our retail clients, they were trying to automate a report for 7 years. And the poor chap that was working on this report had never met his internal customer that was a user of this report. He'd been automating elements, changing definitions, changing the format, but actually the feedback from the end customer was coming 2 or 3 weeks further down the line. And so, what we did is we went in, we've created this cross-functional team. We brought the customer into the room to be part of that team. And actually within 7 weeks, that report was automated and available without a touch of, without any human interaction, by 5 a.m. each of the days. So, breaking down those silos and actually being aligned to those business outcomes is definitely the way forward. And, we always talk about it as data agility, of bringing data with a bit of agile ways of working, because having those cross-functional teams are really key in creating some of that change.
That's so interesting, and I love that story there, from 7 years to 7 weeks. I think so much recently we've seen how projects can suddenly be sped up by certain external things. So that's fantastic. Graham, do you want to give us a bit of a story on how you've been dealing with silos?
Yeah, I was about to snigger at the 7 years, but then I'm sure all of us have heard of examples like 7 years or slightly less than 7 years, but way, way, way too long. I think for us, actually, one of the biggest catalysts of most recently was actually our office move. So we relocated from probably slightly dated, old-fashioned, sort of office block, and we moved into what I consider to be a more 21st century working environment. So the office might have been 20 years old, but actually the complete refit and design around sort of a collaborative working space. And I think that broke down the silos that existed between people. That, okay, we were not massively distributed around the country, but you had silos within an office block. And I think you can't underestimate what working space does to silo mentality. And although we're quite late to the game in terms of using collaboration tools and techniques, the office move alone made a big difference. And I'd say to people, sometimes take advantage of big changes like that to help break down, some of those sort of silos. And I think the other point I think I'd make is that Caroline Carruthers talks about when she goes into organisations that she drinks a lot of coffee and eats a lot of cake. And whilst I like coffee and I like cake, it's not really good for you. But actually, I would use anything almost as a reason to break down that silo for me and sort of my data management team. So frankly, if that's beer, wine, sports, reports, fashion, you name it, I probably don't draw the line at anything at having some common link that isn't necessarily about data or reports or automation, that just gets you into a conversation and maybe breaks down the barriers.
Brilliant. Now, audience, do remember you can submit your questions to us and I will gladly put them to our panelists. And Graham, just kind of going on from that, I think it's really interesting about the working space element, because I assume you're working from home right now. So have you been able to transfer that? Have you been able to transfer that, breakdown of silos, or have they reappeared because everyone's in their home office right now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think luckily we're probably about 18 months into our sort of office move. So completed, but we were sort of 18 months we've been there. That coincided with a rollout of tech in terms of hardware, in terms of software, that gave people tools. Now, my team, I think, have been very early adopters and experienced sort of home workers, flexible workers, as I prefer to call it, and keeping in touch with their teammates as well as colleagues in other areas. So actually, I think it's settled down quite quickly. The thing I think you miss is the corridor conversation, that coffee and cake moment, that talk about the football, talk about whatever it is in another area, and someone goes, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, we're going live with a new product," and actually suddenly that's quite a lot of work for the data team. But interestingly, I was back in our London office this week for 2 days, quite lonely, because there was only about 15 of us in the office that were asked to come in, and actually it felt quite lonely because no one else was there. That was very much silo, because I needed to go and use the collaboration tools to go and talk to anyone, and they were all working from home, and I was in the office environment. So actually, you need to have a good balance, I think. Yeah,
that's great. Vincent, how have you been dealing with the challenge of silos?
Actually, I'm currently in a big silo, alone in the office. Pretty much nobody is here. I would say I will not be that destructive. I don't think I would like to break down silos, but I would definitely build small windows into them and then probably build bridges between the silos. I will give you, as an example, what I have done with my team. We have started a couple of years ago a new training, or it's more like actually an awareness workshop. So taking a real reinsurance treaty as a starting example, and then we have followed the flow of the data end to end within the company. So starting with the submission data, the underwriting process, the pricing process, then there was a claim arriving and seeing what happens on the technical accounting side, on the claim side, then moving to finance, reserving, asset management, the asset liability matching, and then moving on to risk management. Of course, all this data is connected at different levels of granularity when you move along what I call the data supply chain. But it was a very enlightening experience for all the participants. Pretty much every employee is a specialist within his or her particular silo, and they have a very deep understanding of their data and their processes, and everything is very much streamlined. But actually, it's very important to understand what are the challenges of your neighbors, and how to connect this information. And so I think we really have to connect those silos, those bridges, and I'm convinced that actually the value of data does not lie in its complexity, but in its combination potential. And I think this was very much welcome, this course and this training, and we are trying to continue offering this. Of course, the difficulty is that it's classroom training. Nowadays, it's a bit more difficult to do, and it's very interactive. But I think now we have been forced with the technology to use a lot of different tools, and I think I will be much more comfortable offering this course in the future online as well.
Fantastic. Now, it was mentioned earlier, and I think it's a really good point when it comes to this kind of change management, and when we're looking to do any new thing. I think there's always going to be a level of resistance, whether that's a case of they don't quite buy into how it's being done, or they don't like the idea. In some industries, I know with insurance, the increase in automation is giving that increased fear that actually that's my job going out the window, rather than my time being put in another place. How have you guys been dealing with resistance in your own paths, and is there kind of any top tips that you can give the audience? Per, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, it's a really common challenge. We don't like change sometimes, as much as we say that we do. I think the way we've approached it, when we've worked with clients, is to actually pilot, and start small, and start showing the benefits of, those different ways of working, or that different mindset to a challenge, and kind of bringing people into the camp rather than, throwing the ball over the fence, so to speak. And I think, what we've generally found is when you've started as a pilot, you have all sorts of emotions and opinions of whether this is going to work or whatnot. But as people go on the journey together, they're living it together. It's really important to talk about learnings, is what's working well, what isn't. But then generally what we found is when they've started to see the benefits of it, people start to kind of embrace it. And actually, then it's the people on the outside that want to be inside and saying, well, I want to work in this way. And we've generally seen, when you take that approach, that kind of employee engagement survey scores go up by about 20%. So at the end of the day, we all want to go into our jobs feeling as though we're making a difference. And when they start seeing that some of that's being accelerated, it's a little bit more fun because you've got people to talk to and problem solve together with. It's made a real difference, and kind of you then start to win hearts and minds with that approach. So, I'd always say, start with pilots and then just build out, but just take people on the journey, but talk about it, I think is really key as well on how it feels.
So you've kind of got that proven success, and you can, pitch that to other people, and they want to get involved. Yeah, I love that. Graham, how about you? Do you experience much resistance, or is it less so?
I think it really is some and some, and I think I agree with Per's point that it is about a journey. And in particular, the destination isn't redundancy. Because, yeah, there's definitely, although people may not say the words, they are definitely less welcoming when you're sort of turning up saying, we're doing the automation. And they go, right, so that means I'm not going to be required to do my job, do my process, rather than actually being involved in designing it and realizing that companies often will reallocate them to other work, which is, equally useful or more useful, and they can learn skills, or they can be involved in the automation. So they can be involved in helping to design these processes, etc. I think it is incredibly difficult, and I don't think it's often well handled. I visited a large warehouse where they had the current, I call it manual, but still automated process for putting shopping in bags. And literally feet away from these people were the robots that were being built and tested. Not being built, but being tested as pilots right next to them, literally. And obviously they can't go and talk to the robots, but they had the robots right next to them. And I said, we spoke to a couple of workers and said, well, I'm not bothered, maybe eventually they'll replace my job, but maybe there'll be another job in the warehouse, or I'll get another job in another warehouse that doesn't have robots. They actually were quite accepting of the situation, rather than being over there pouring petrol over them and setting fire to them, which is probably what I sort of expected, if I was honest.
Yeah, very much me too. I think if I saw a robot sat here doing my job, I think I'd be doing the same. Vincent, how about you? How have you been dealing with any form of resistance to kind of projects that you've done, and kind of what are your top tips for dealing with that?
I'm not sure that I have a tip for that. What I definitely try to do is to try to understand why people are resistant. And sometimes the only way to do this is really to try to step into their shoes. And sometimes I had a possibility to make job rotations at Swiss Re. So really understanding the process and what the people are doing in a very humble and modest way, it gives you actually sometimes to understand the complexity and the work that some people are doing, and that it's not that easily automated. I think this is definitely the first step, really trying to understand what people are doing, and really trying to understand their challenges and where they are coming from. And then after that, we can discuss together and see actually if things can be a little bit improved or changed. But as I mentioned in my first introduction, I would say that not everything can be automated. I know there are some processes at Swiss Re that are really anchored within a single team in a single location. They have a very robust knowledge about this, and I would think it would cost an awful amount of time and money to try to automate these things completely. So it's about finding the right trade-off, actually, as I mentioned before, between a little bit the data, the automation, and the human touch.
Brilliant. So kind of the theme throughout all of your answers really has been communication. So whether you're communicating the successes behind it, communicating why it's important and what it means for you, and also communicating kind of that end goal in a sense of, we're not not intending to take over the whole world with it. It's a case of just making some processes slicker, which is great. Now, Vincent, we've actually had a question come in, I think aimed at you, because you spoke about that training and kind of that data journey from start to finish. And this person wants to know, how has the current COVID situation, has it changed that data, and does that training thus need to be kind of updated because there's going to be, I assume, a bit of a change to underwriting and claims at the moment?
Well, there are a lot of discussion on the claim side at the moment in the insurance and reinsurance industry, especially around the topic of business interruption and contingent business interruption. So I'm not going now to enter into this discussion. I think this is not the goal of this meeting. Of course, my training, what I have to adapt for my training, I have to be very current, because when I started, I mentioned it was in 2013. Actually, this treaty that I took as an example is quite old, and then actually the knowledge about it, maybe the underwriters or the claim analysts that are not in the company anymore, or they have switched and they are now working in another desk, and it's difficult actually. what is very difficult in a reinsurance company is to reverse engineer from the data to the reality. So actually, if you go pretty far away in the past, it's quite difficult to understand the meaning of some of the data. So to keep it current, actually, this training, what I have to do is to take new examples and really follow the life cycle, maybe of a bound contract, almost real time, and by sticking to the current processes as well. I would like to mention as well, I forgot in the previous point about the silo, and it is linked to this training, that I am a very strong advocate of creating a new functional role within companies. And actually, I would call this data flow analyst, or maybe in the reinsurance industry, it would be value chain analyst. So really people connecting the dot between these different silos. And I think there is a lot of potential value in having that kind of functional role, trying to understand better the processes and the data between the different departments.
Brilliant. So a theme that's kind of arisen out of this event, and also in previous events that we ran the US edition of this event only a couple of weeks ago, and something that kept coming up and up when we were talking about new processes and trying to streamline them, was the challenge. Sometimes the challenge, or something that's putting companies further ahead, is how data literate their workforce is. So understanding that data, understanding the difference between really good quality data and not so great quality, and then also kind of linking into the things of governance and privacy, and having a good understanding and healthy understanding of the data. So has there been much of an impact in the work that you do with having a data literate workforce? Is it something that you're looking to increase with training, or kind of where are you on that data literacy journey? Graham, I'll go to you first.
I don't think we've done a very good job at perhaps defining what we mean by data literacy. I mean, if you say I'm not a very good golfer, people probably know that I take a lot of shots to get around a golf course. That's pretty simple. If you say you're not very good at data literacy, what do you mean by that? So I think it's more encompassing. So it includes the technology. So adoption of technology, use of technology. I think it's numerical. So it's about basic numerical reasoning. Lots of people can write scripts and documents and things, but actually, I think numerical reasoning in this country is quite poor, unfortunately. And then, of course, there is the pure data bit, which is some things you just mentioned about regulation and data population, and actually physically what the data is. What does it tell you? And I think what we've seen is it can vary so much in a company between so many different people. So if we're running, we were sort of building some new processes, automated, got a nice sort of front end, and we probably internally just took it out to market internally as we took the last product, and completely missed that the stakeholder audience didn't have the same level of data literacy, and therefore actually we needed to do far more helping them through it. Doing sort of re-education, having done sort of a certain level of education. We even made little videos, little 2-minute videos of how to do a certain thing in the product. And we did a lot more. And I think what it taught us that says, actually, just because we're the same and we take something and we build this fantastic automated process with data and we have a product, we actually need to think about the stakeholders at the end and think about them individually, or go back to the good old segmentations that lots of analysts have done over the years, and segment your stakeholders and say, do you know what? Because this is this type of stakeholders, we actually need to approach how we educate them and improve their usage of what we're giving to them by actually looking at what we understand to be their sort of skill sets. And actually, what will happen over time probably is you'll make more and more people data literate, but they will be on different parts of the journey at any one time.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think that's really poignant what you said there about understanding the skill sets, and not just assuming that everyone doesn't already have a base layer knowledge, whether it be that kind of technological or pure data stance, and kind of understanding where they are currently so that you can do that re-education and go back in and retouch where they need it. Yeah, that's great. Vincent, how about you?
Actually, we are currently assessing at Swiss Re the need for a data literacy program, which would be probably embedded in something a little more generic, like a data culture. Maybe some of you may be surprised. I would say at Swiss Re we are pretty much advanced when it comes to data governance, data management, and data analytics. Swiss Re is a very analytical company. So and you would be hard-pressed to find an underwriter or actuary or risk modeler who is data illiterate. So in principles, they have very good knowledge with data and all the uncertainty that comes with the data. But I think it is more related, what we're trying to do, to the soft skills related maybe to storytelling around data, argue with data, communicating, and data visualization. And to lift the rest of the company, maybe not at the same level as an actuary or data scientist, but to lift a little bit every employee a bit upwards towards more skill related to data, and then especially how to take decisions, or better decisions based on data and maybe less on gut feelings.
Brilliant. And I think that data visualization is a really interesting piece, because I know it's something that's being increasingly kind of wanted, is not just having tons and tons of data that doesn't really make much sense, but actually being able to present it in a way that could be understood by people who perhaps aren't as data literate. And I'm kind of thinking of those key stakeholders and on the exec board. And I know in previous sessions, we've had really great conversations about how you have to almost speak a different language to different departments. You know, your CFOs, CEOs, CDOs are going to speak very different languages, and actually being able to visualize that data can sometimes help cross those boundaries. But Payal, let's go to you to kind of wrap up this data literacy part, and how do you feel about this?
I'm going to expand a little bit on what Vincent was saying, actually. So, when I think about data literacy, I do think about data culture in some ways, and there's two kind of prongs to that. One is having a data-driven mindset. And then the second is, moving away from those gut feel decisions and actually putting data at the heart of those decisions. And I think, when you start thinking about organizational culture, we really have to start at the top and drive that down. And I'll give you one example. We were working with a retailer, and their big challenge was trying to increase online sales through their digital mechanism. And part of it was they were looking at, what payment solution do they have at the end of their journey to then convert the customer in their shopping basket. And, they'd been working on this for a while, and we went in kind of towards the end of it. And then it wasn't on track, so we kind of helped mobilize a team to do that. But then we asked the question, well, how many customers, what phones are people using, when they go onto your app? And actually what we found was that 70% of the users were using Apple devices, and they hadn't implemented their payment solution wasn't Apple Pay, it was something else. And so you just think there's a great example where it was off gut feel and what the leadership team thought were the right focus, but actually it's a really basic piece of data on what profile do our customers have and what devices are they using. That should have been looked at the very inception of this idea. And again, that's so important to get right. Of all leadership need to be asking, okay, we've got this decision in front of us, what's the data saying? And it's not about the leadership going in and looking at Power BI or Tableau and looking for that data themselves, but it's driving the culture to ask the question, what's the data saying? What are our customers saying? And so I think it is just those two things of having that data-driven mindset, but kind of bringing data into that heart of those decisions, really. And then things start to move.
Absolutely. And it's so funny because I looked to the side of my screen, because just before you explained that last point, I had a question that came in that says, what do you do with a C-suite that aren't data-driven and they're still very much kind of gut-led? And I'd be interested, actually, Vincent, Graham, do you want to weigh in on that, how you kind of deal with that?
The difficulty is we produce sometimes a lot of internal reports. We are not always convinced about the value of each of those reports. I'm not going to put a figure of what is really useful or not. Actually, it's all about trying to convince people with really good use cases and really show them the power of data and what could be done with that. What is sometimes a little bit a challenge for us, or probably for all the big reinsurance companies, is that we can be pretty far away from the underlying risk, and sometimes we don't have the data. So depending which area you are studying, actually, by its very nature, actually, on the reinsurance side, we receive a lot of aggregated data, but we don't have the details. And then having the details to make more granular analysis nowadays would be quite fundamental, at least from a data science point of view. Actually, probably a data scientist would love to see all the contracts and claims of maybe a primary insurance company having a contract with a Swiss Re, but I doubt that it will happen in the near future due maybe, competition, or people know the value of the data, that you have security and compliance constraints. So actually there are people saying that reinsurance companies have a lot of data, and which is actually true and not true at the same time. We are exposed to a lot of markets, a lot of lines of business. But actually all this information is at a very aggregated level most of the time.
Brilliant. Graham, did you want to add in on that one?
It might be slightly controversial, but there's probably only so long that you'll bang your head against the wall or the door of the C-suite, and then you'll probably give up banging and leave. And it might sound extreme, but the last 10 plus years, I've definitely been at organizations where, they were very, I don't want to say data driven, because we'll argue about what that means, but sort of data guided, and they, use data to back up decisions, to make decisions. And then a change of ownership, change of sort of directors would then make them go far less important, and data would slip right down the organization. And, sometimes just the position of the team gives you the strongest message. When you're reporting to someone who reports to someone who reports to somebody, and you're 5 layers from the top, and I saw that go from literally 5 layers from the top to, no, you're reporting to the top overnight with a change of ownership. And then 5 years down the line, we changed ownership again, and we sunk a few levels. And that's your clearest sign. And I think ultimately, as I said, you can do coffee and cake, but at some point with those people, you will actually have to decide to give up and say, this isn't an organization for me, because they're not going to do the things with data that you want to do, but also that you experience already at that same company. So when you've seen that change within the same company you've been at, that's even harder to take, because you feel you've seen the change, the difference you can make, and people have seen it with you and sort of congratulated your team, etc., on what they deliver as value add to the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we think change, we think of such a linear route, but actually there is that very real possibility with a change of leadership or a change in approach to have step backs or to be launched forwards. So I think thinking of the journey in many ways is important. So Vincent, I just want to pick up on something you said about sometimes we don't have the data. I know earlier this week in one of our sessions, it was suggested that a lot of workforces now are really data hungry. They want more of it, and it kind of reflects society in a way. In Netflix, we get algorithms straight away to tell us what we're going to like. We can go on Google and know all the facts in the world straight away. So when it comes to streamlining our processes and trying to keep everyone together, and you've got people wanting data, how have you been dealing with the fact that you've got data hungry people? You may not always be able to give them the best data. Is it a case that you give them what you've got, or you hold back, or how do you manage that kind of hunger for data?
It's a very interesting question. Sometimes you can buy the data. So for a one-off study, or maybe you can receive the data from your clients and help them build use cases around this data. As I have mentioned on the reinsurance side, sometimes we don't always have the data, and we would love to have more. Another very interesting trend that I have seen actually at the beginning of my professional journey, it was more or less 20 years ago, where people were still trying to build very complex applications having a lot of data. What I have seen now is actually on the front end side, it's getting more and more leaner and very light. And for me, it's quite a paradox, because actually on the front end, you try to build the things with very few data, And on the reporting or analytics side, you have people hungry for data and waiting for more and more to build maybe complex models on the basis of this data. And sometimes I have even seen cases where very important data is getting read off. So actually it is removed from front-end application, and then suddenly it is missing for a very important process, and people were not at all aware of this. They just wanted to be maybe a leaner or more agile in their particular silos. So actually, yeah, the very different trends, but it's true that sometimes I would say that, especially on the reinsurance side, that we may lack some data. And then added to this, of course, we have the complexity of that was mentioned in the previous talk of the right operationalization of all these data models. A lot of the time you have a one-off studies that are done, or sometimes it is good enough, but then the next step, the operationalization, is a real challenge as well.
Brilliant. Graham, how about you? Do you have a data hungry workforce, and how do you handle that appetite?
Yeah, I think we definitely do have now, and have had in the past. They definitely go through moments, and they're much more to do with the bigger picture of what's going on in your company. So it's pretty widely known in the market that Addison Lee was trying to sell itself for the last 18 months. There was a real focus on that sales transaction, trying to get the company sold. There was probably less focus on sort of internal and sort of keeping an eye on trading without necessarily setting the world alight. And so those big things can actually get in the way of some of the smaller things that you might otherwise be doing. I think where we sort of struggle is it comes back to this people thing, that you can have a turnover in key areas and a reset moment. So give you an example, we started last year with a COO. They left, we had an interim COO, and then we finished the year with another COO. And a few months into this year, so this is, we've got another COO. So actually there's been 4 different COOs. Now, each one of them wanted to change and specify and change the sort of operational KPIs and metrics that we'd set up, and go through 4 iterations and changes. The data team lose a little bit of love and respect when that sort of happens, because you worry that they're just changing it for change's sake, not saying, do you know what, you've arrived on day one. Why don't you have a look at the metrics? Why don't you monitor the business before you start saying, change it to the one that's based on the company you were last at? Because that's very easy to do, isn't it? We can all go around different companies and say, make everything look like past company, because that's easy for me. Because when I move company, you make all your reporting look like the stuff that I'm familiar with, but actually it may not add any value whatsoever. But you've then used a load of data resources to present numbers in a slightly different way to make it easy for you to use it. And those things, and that's not an isolated, sort of moment. We've had quite a few of those where it feels like changes for change's sake. And that can be very demoralizing, I think, for a data team.
And I suppose that then links back to kind of what we were discussing about that resistance for change, especially if you're being asked to change for things that you perhaps haven't been communicated well as to why we're doing it. And perhaps that communication hasn't happened because really there isn't a great idea apart from like what you've said there, which is, because it's easier for me, which doesn't tend to go down too well with people. No. And Per, I'm conscious of... Go on, Greg.
Sorry. So I suppose if, as a senior data leader, part of that is for me to go out and have that, discussion or battle on their behalf and help fight their corner and reach a compromise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm conscious of the time. So Per, do you want to finish up kind of the main conversation there about being data hungry? Do you see it lots? And how have you been managing that appetite?
So I think having a data-hungry organization is brilliant. You want curious people that are going to help solve problems. So it's a really positive trait and behavior. And, some organizations totally lack it. So it's really special when that happens. I think what's key to then nurture that curiosity and hunger is being clear on what the challenges are to then help solve. So then, that data and curiosity gets translated into kind of actionable strategies, so to speak. So then, you're really going to think about adding value back to the organization. So it's really positive. And one of the things as Women in Data last year, we did a huge survey to the world of all the analysts and data scientists out there across the UK. And we found that, kind of worryingly, over 50% of analysts were thinking about changing jobs in the next 12 months because silos and bureaucracy and lack of decision making was the challenge that they were bumping into. And that's quite scary because you just think, well, actually, what's creating that? They're totally hungry and want to make a difference, but actually it's the systems around them that's stopping it. And then that, they're getting demotivated in their role. So yeah, it's such an asset when, you've got a data driven company and lots of that hunger. But all I could say to, the leaders is to ensure that you channel it.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, what are the objectives that you can then best use that curiosity to drive.
Brilliant. I think that kind of neatly ties this session off, really, because you've just kind of touched on all of the main. I've been busily writing notes here, and kind of the main three answers to the streamlining enterprises and processes is people, culture, and communication. I think if you can get those aligned and correct for your organization, then you're going to be on a good way to going back to that survey right at the start, to being well on your way in that journey, but also towards completing it. So thank you so much, panelists, for joining me today. I've received lots of messages from the audience saying they're enjoying it and saying great insights and things like that. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, audience, you will be able to see on your screen all of the socials of our panelists. Do be sure to connect with them and continue on this conversation. Thank you for joining us all week long if you have done. And just the same, if you're real quick, grab a selfie and enter into that Data Champions online competition. Also, in these last few moments, do be sure to head into the Resource Centre and download all of that content. Now, just quickly before we end today, you see a lot of my face during these events, but the faces you don't see are the real team members who make this happen. So a big shout out to Delia, Molly, Jess and Matt, who have been absolutely fundamental in running this all week long. They've kept my stress down and the stress down of the speakers, and that's the main thing. So thank you so much. Do be sure to download the Global Events Calendar so you can see when you can join us next, because we do have lots of fabulous opportunities for you. But until next time, stay safe, stay well. Thank you and goodbye.